Lawyers of Reddit, what's the dumbest thing you've had to explain to a client? I watched a FL Supreme Court appeal over a murder case. The guy killed several people with a baseball bat and wanted his sentence mitigated because he had PTSD. He claimed he had PTSD from experiencing the murder he committed. The court had to explain to him that a mental issue acquired while committing a crime cannot mitigate the crime you committed. Bankruptcy attorney here. If you know you're coming to my office to file bankruptcy, do not make major financial decisions before you talk to me, e.g., cashing out your 401k, paying your family members the money you owe them, buying a car with no intention of paying off the loan, etc. The court allows you to discharge your debt and the only thing they ask is for you to be honest and not sneaky about it. You gotta respect the process. Edit. I'm getting a lot of questions about personal situations. But I am not here to provide legal advice. If you are considering bankruptcy, speak to an attorney sooner than later. Most will provide a free consultation, and the longer you wait, the more problematic your situation may become. In my state we have this thing called victims' compensation. An oversimplification of how it works goes as follows. If you are the victim of a crime and suffer some form of injury, for example, psychological, physical, etc., you can apply for a payment from state funds. If you are the perpetrator of one of those crimes, for example, an assault, robbery, pedophilia, etc., an order can be made for you to pay the state back an amount relating to that victim's compensation. I had a client who felt the process of being convicted for assaulting his relatives and having to pay victims' compensation back to the state was arduous, and in return, he should be receiving victims' compensation from the state. So that was fun to explain. Edit. Explanation was you are not the victim in that. I once had to explain what a maiden name was. They had no idea. Similarly, with a different client, I tried to explain why they needed to fill out the intake questionnaire. I was explaining that I need information such as their name, address and date of birth in order to draft paperwork. Their response: "Why do I have to do this? What did I even hire you for? You're useless. If I have to do all this work I might as well represent myself." They were super pissed and stomped out the front door. Sorry, I don't magically know your date of birth. Edit. As for the maiden name, it was a very small country town. This person was most definitely a native English speaker. As for the questionnaire, someone asked why we don't just ask for a driver's license. The questionnaire was about 2 or 3 pages long and also needed other information such as any previous names, social security number, children's names, etc. I once had to explain to a client that he could, in fact, fire an employee for 1. Stealing significant sums of money from the safe, 2. Pulling a gun on a co-worker who questioned these activities, and 3. Waving said gun in a customer's face moments later, all of which were on camera. That your boss sending you to a drug test after he walked in on you snorting sugar off your desk does not qualify as entrapment. You cannot sue him. When I was a legal intern at a criminal defender's law office, we had a client who was charged with murder. We explained to the client not to make any phone calls saying anything incriminating because it will be recorded. Where prisoners can use the phone there is a giant sign that says phone calls will be recorded. On top of that, before you are able to call out there is an automated recording that tells you that all calls are being recorded and monitored, unless it is to your attorney, which are covered by privilege. Client made a call to his girlfriend that evening asking her to hide the gun. Edit. Just found out what happened to the case. Apparently it was dismissed. The defense attorney was really good. Edit 2. Because I think my previous edit infuriated a lot of people. Yeah. It sucks that a lot of criminals tend to get out on some BS technicalities. But a good criminal defense attorney will make sure that a prosecutor does their job properly too and the case won't go up on appeal and get reversed on some other error. Also, I was just a lowly intern at the time. Stop sending me hate mail. I recently had a call from a guy who found out that Long John Silver's was microwaving his baked shrimp combo. He wanted to eat there for every meal for a year and then sue them for false advertising. He changed his mind when I suggested that he would probably die of a heart attack before reaching his 1-year goal. That he hadn't really won a 20 million euro European super lottery from Australia that he'd never entered, and that it was a good thing that his family, bank and church wouldn't lend him the $2,000 they said they needed to verify his identity, on top of the several hundred he'd already sent them. And that yes, his priest was right, it was a scam. This was during a clinic at a free community legal center. The poor guy had limited English and only $20 left in his bank account, and he really did not want to let go of the 20 million euro dream. His priest had sent him to us for advice because he wasn't having any luck talking sense into the old guy himself and thought lawyers might help. A lawyer can't out and out lie. You said to them, yeah, I burned his ducking house down and pissed on the ashes. He can't say you were 2 states away. That blew some my students' heads. Represented a client charged with statutory abuse who had a large number of explanations for the various evidence in his case that I had to explain would not be a good idea to testify to or argue to the jury. The KY jelly you purchased with the kid at Walmart was not for applying to an undiagnosed skin condition on your chest. The hundreds of pages of internet chat logs prior to traveling hundreds of miles to meet the kid, consisting of repeated explicit sexual overtures, emotional manipulation, lies about your age and wealth, and specific plans for how you would remove him from his parents' home were not meaningless banter. The fact that you had an active prescription for Viagra does not mean you are asexual. The semen matching your DNA did not find its way into the rectum of the 13-year-old boy because of your medical condition that results in leakage, and the fact that when you are staying in a hotel room, you do not lift the toilet seat when you urinate, which must have resulted in the material being deposited on the seat and transferred to the boy when he sat on the seat. You were not the victim, taken advantage of by the hypersexual teenager for whom you were merely trying to provide innocent emotional support. I had to explain all of these things, and others, many times. I'm not sure he ever actually believed any of them. That they had to pay me. This is more common than you think. For some reason, some people think lawyers are like their personal spiritual guides or fairy godmother. When a client called me this past Memorial Day and I asked why she was calling me on a holiday, she replied that she didn't think Jews celebrated Memorial Day. Never thought that I would have to explain that to anyone. Edit. To answer some of the questions. Yes, I am Jewish. No, I never told her I was Jewish. I have an answering service which took her call and emailed me the message, which was that it was very urgent that she speak with me that day. Given that the courts were closed and her case was a paternity and child support matter, I thought it had to be quite the emergency. It was not. She just wanted to ask whether the suspected father was required to take the DNA test ordered by the court. I then had to explain what paternity meant. L. Scott Briscoe's free legal advice is hilarious and absolutely worth a read. Edit. Part 2. Here. That you really can go to jail if we lose at trial. Well, from the other side, I once missed a court date and assumed that had put me in even deeper legal trouble. My lawyer then had to explain to me that dodging his calls to avoid being arrested was just dumb, and the exact wrong course of action. Don't signal to the judge you need to use the restroom during your trial by making eye contact and vigorously nodding while urgently pointing at your crotch. It doesn't matter if you were sober or not. You jumped out of a 3rd-story window with a beer bottle and threw it at a cop. The jury is going to think you were drunk. Also, I think you were drunk. Why they should not have called the cops to tell them exactly what they did that violated the restraining order. I had a client once who was in trouble for stealing sample medications from a hospital. We got security footage from the DA as part of the evidence, and when it came down we watched it together. The camera was literally 10 feet away in a well-lit room, and we watched her shovel prescription samples into a garbage bag and walk off. After it was done, she turned to me and asked if I thought she was going to be able to get off. I said no. I once had to explain to opposing counsel that his entire argument was wrong because he had cited a statute for chattels, not real property. It was a case involving a land contract. I used to be a legal aid lawyer, so sometimes I had sovereign citizens come in for help. I'd have to explain that their magic words wouldn't solve anything and they were going to get evicted. If they wouldn't agree to negotiate for settlement, I wouldn't represent them because they never had any real defenses and we didn't have the resources to litigate impossible cases. Edit. I get it. I said statue instead of statute. I'm useless on mobile and without my clerk, so this was a perfect storm. Also, I don't litigate anymore, so I'm fortunately done with sovereign citizens. I was contacted by a couple who had paid for a trip to see the midnight sun in northern Norway. They wanted to sue the travel agency when they found out it was the same sun as always. I had to explain that there's only a single sun, and that they can't sue a travel agency for selling a midnight sun trip. Regretting having sex with a man doesn't make it abuse the next morning. That the presence of yellow fringe on the flags in the courtroom do not mean that the court is an admiralty court, without jurisdiction to hear the client's criminal case. Sovereign citizens are something else. I had to argue against someone who claimed to have copyright law on their side for the opening of Bach's Cantata No. 140, Watch It Off. A pop instrumentalist arranged Bach's masterpiece, then claimed it as his own. After I played the original, there was zero doubt in the courtroom regarding who was the master and who was the imposter. I once had a client who wanted to declare bankruptcy. I explained he needed to have his tax returns for the past few years filed in order to do so. He said he hadn't filed taxes in 20 years because it ain't none of the government's business how much money I make. But my ex-husband's lawyer had to explain to him that hearsay doesn't mean someone heard him say it. My ex was arrested for felony domestic battery against me after he called 911 and threatened to kill me. He thought his threats were inadmissible because someone heard him say them. Ergo, hearsay. I had a mediation last week with a client on a really crappy case and managed to settle for a decent amount. I then explained to the plaintiff her share of the settlement after paying the bill. She was confused, so I explained that I was speaking about our fee and expenses. She got upset because we were taking her money. I had to explain what a contingency contract was and how we were compensated for our services. The conversation took a turn for the absurd when I had to explain I did not work for free. Not a lawyer, but processed a case where a woman sued her lawyers after a divorce because they didn't explain to her that divorcing her husband meant she'd no longer be married. I work on appeals, which means I spend more time with the law than with real people, but the law has some gems, like this dude. Who really happened? More than at the police station. The arresting officer advised defendant, both orally and with a consent form, of his constitutional rights pursuant to Miranda v. Arizona, 384 U.S. 436, 86 SCT, 1602. 16 LED, 2D 694, 1966. Defendant refused to sign the consent form and stated that he would never waive his rights. At the same time, however, he asked the arresting officer whether he could speak to him man to man. More than at this point, a detective with the task force entered the room with the evidence of the drugs gathered from the inventory search of the Corvette and advised defendant of the charges that would be filed against him. To this, defendant responded, "You think this is big time? This ain't it." The detective then asked defendant whether he was willing to provide them any information, and defendant responded that if he were released with his drugs in his possession that night, he would call the police occasionally with information on certain persons he felt needed to be off the streets. The detective then started to leave the booking area, and defendant said, "And I want my it back." When the detective asked him whether he was referring to the drugs discovered in the Corvette, defendant responded that he was. File that under. You should definitely exercise that right to remain silent. No, you dingus. Self-defense does not mean he punches you in the face and then 2 weeks later you go to his house, ring his doorbell, and kick the it out of him. From this week, client, so I don't smoke meth. I think it's from unprotected 6. Me, so you would like me to explain to the judge it's okay. You just bang meth heads. Client, yeah. Not a lawyer, but I've seen multiple people basically ignore a notification for a court hearing. Then they end up asking for help a couple of days before they are due to attend. Given those types of people, the sky's the limit for stupid. I went on a date with a lawyer recently who told me he had to be at work at 9 AM the next day to explain to someone that he could, in fact, be fired for killing someone with the company vehicle. A little late, but every so often the thing goes around on Facebook where put up this copy and paste about how Facebook had to respect their privacy. The post says so. Any attorney knows full well that you can't unilaterally change a user agreement that way. Except this friend is an attorney. She passed multiple bar exams at the same time. On her first try, she's one of my references, and she posts that nonsense. Here's hoping it was early and she needed coffee. Probate attorney, having to explain to people not to take property that was bequeathed to someone else. Funny how the decedent promised the car to 4 people but willed it to a 5th. In my state there are mandatory treble damages for conversion against an estate. So that $20,000 car you wanted turns into a $60,000 penalty. Let the PR or trustees distribute according to the will or trust. Then attempt to get property you think belongs to you. Don't just take it. Happens a lot. Filled in as a receptionist at my dad's firm many moons ago. Dumb son of a long-standing client called in a panic. He had gotten drunk and gotten married in Las Vegas to his long-term GF and baby mama. He said, but it's fine, right? I mean, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. So if I never go back, I am good? ? I finally figured out that he took it literally and thought that he was only married while in Clark County. I had to explain that, no, he was married in all 50 states. He started yelling that he wanted a do-over. So, of course that was the catchphrase for the rest of the summer. Additional info. Since it wasn't germane to the Q being asked, I didn't include it. But now, the rest of the story. While I was explaining that he was indeed married, another sec passed her notice that Rick X. I nodded and she said, give me the phone. She had gone online and found pictures of the joyous event. Rick, log on to MySpace right now and delete all of those photos immediately, and for the love of God make your page private. Brief silence. Why? Because you are on probation. The judge will revoke it and send you to jail. You aren't allowed to leave the state, let alone be drinking and partying. Yes, later, on the advice of counsel, he stayed married rather than appear before a judge and admit that he had violated the terms of his probation. Idiot. That it was not fiscally responsible to convert that 6-figure settlement check immediately and to instead put it into some sort of savings account or something similar for the benefit of your kids. Received call from bank 20 minutes later asking if it was okay to turn into $100s. Not to a client, but other party. I was acting for a particular manufacturer. They were sued for an injury incurred by someone using a product made by a different manufacturer. I rang their lawyer and said I was acting for A and I didn't understand why A had been named as defendant in the suit, but the body of the claim said the plaintiff had been injured by a product made by B. I asked if it was a monster typo or what. The response was that they thought A was the manufacturer of products sold under the name B. Now that isn't inherently stupid, I guess. So I said that had no basis in fact whatsoever, and that A and B were unrelated competitors, and asked, as a matter of curiosity, how they had reached the conclusion that A were the manufacturer of B. The response was along the lines of someone in the office, I think it was maybe Jim, one of our clerks, who thought he'd read somewhere that B were made by A. That was it. No checking of the product paperwork, no company searches, no brand name register searches, no inquiries with our client or B, not even an effing Google. Just some guy in the office had once heard, and on that basis they issued a very financially sizable product liability suit. Not a lawyer, but a friend of my dad once tried to sue him. Why? Because his dad, the friend's, had died, and since my dad was like a father to his friend, he should give him money every month just like his dad did when he was alive. Apparently the lawyer just said that's not how it works. By far and away the strangest thing I have ever had to explain to a client is how to use an elevator. Our courtroom was on the 4th floor, and she needed to take an elevator to get there. I had to describe how you get in, push the 4 and then get out when the lights above shows she's on floor 4. Yeah. The dumbest legal thing I've had to explain is that you can't terminate your parental rights voluntarily and then request visitation with that child. I am a lawyer and I mostly don't touch the sit on Reddit anymore because teenagers and drunks want to argue with no basis to do so. Fun to read though. A guy called up. He had 5 children with 5 different women. and woman number 5 was suing him for support. This would change his withholding from work 77% instead of 62%. He was also jobless and let out of jail for felonious non-payment of child support on woman number 2. The best job a felon can hope for is like $10 an hour, capping his pre-tax earning potential around $2.33 an hour if he can get hired as a felon. This was especially troubling, as he had no way to support his new girlfriend, who was pregnant. He asked me, "What can I do?" "I don't know. Stop ducking women without protection would be a start." Not a lawyer, but my ex had to have something explained to him. He was jobless, did drugs, had no money, no vehicle etc. Kicked me out of my house with a knife. Decided he was going to get custody of our 7-year-old son. I lawyered up and my lawyer told me that his lawyer will straighten him out. He doesn't have to. My ex told me after that his lawyer basically told him to duck off. Unemployed, homeless daddies don't get custody. Never mind take a kid away from a home-owning, hard-working, addiction-free, school bus driving mother. She told him based on his previous tax return that he owed me $623 a month and he would be lucky to get one weekend a month with our son. BTW, he quickly dropped the idea when he saw there was no payoff and my son hasn't seen him in a year. IO. TL. DR. Homeless unemployed drug addict tried to get custody of our son. Late to the party, but I'm a law student and I clerk at a big firm. I was in a partner's office when she took a phone call, in which she had to explain to a potential client that, yes, he did have to pay her if he wanted her to do the several hours of research that his question required. He was baffled as to why she couldn't spend a few hours looking it up and then get back to him with the information for free. I saw the guy yell at his attorney that he wasn't coerced into a confession when the lawyer said that's what it looked like to him. Lawyer had to explain that it was a good thing. Not sure why the guy was mad when he didn't know what it means. I guess it just sounds bad idea, no. Hypothetically, before going into a negotiation for a divorce separation agreement, I sat down with my client. We set clear, specific goals for the situation, spousal support, etc. In the negotiations, I exceeded every goal. We got more money than she told me she would be willing to settle for, more visitation custody, and every one of the little particulars she wanted in the way of personal and real property. Total victory. Conceded to by the opposite party. A few days later, she hypothetically called me up and said, "He's such an asshole. Let's duck him up some more. I want to drag this through the courts." It took a while, but I finally explained to her that we had already won. It was time to move on, and going against our signed agreement now would probably result in a less favorable outcome to her than what we had already achieved. Not a client per se, but a victim. Had to explain what the word ejaculate meant. Defense attorney asked if the defendant ejaculated and she said no. On redirect I explained that the word meant something came out of his D, and she said oh, then yes. Not the brightest person I've ever met. This guy was trying to get divorced and went and had the Attorney General's office begin a SAPCR suit affecting the parent-child relationship. He then found out the AG wouldn't finish the SAPCR without the divorce having been finalized, so he comes into the office wanting to non-suit his divorce, so that he can get a SAPCR processed. I had to ask him in 5 different ways. Do you want to remain married to your wife? Yes or no? He finally gave me a "we're not really married anyways. It was just common law. That's called marriage in this state. So please answer yes or no." I guess so. I didn't process the non-suit, but I told him where he can find forms to do it on his own. That you can, in fact, arrest a husband and wife for the same crime. Basically anything related to discovery. TV has really messed up people's perception of the whole process. Nobody rushes into a courtroom waving new evidence. No, you can't withhold that evidence from the other side after they've requested it. Yes, you need to disclose all of your it. This whole process isn't about finding loopholes, sneaking around and hiding it. It's about seeing who is right, and the judge needs all that data, yo. I had a defendant and I reassured him. I was like, "Hey buddy, look, I know a lot about the law and various other lay warnings. I'm well educated and well versed. I told him that this situation real estate wise is very complex, and then he had the gall to ask me where I went to law school, so of course I just pleaded the fifth. Then I challenged him to go toe to toe with me on bird law to see who comes out the victor. Not a client but an opposing party who claimed that she wouldn't spay her aggressive female pit bull because she was Catholic and didn't believe in birth control. I have to explain to clients on a daily basis that yes, you do have to actually pay for that house you are buying. If your mortgage company hasn't given us the money yet, or you didn't arrange for them to give enough money, then you cannot pay for house, and house is not yours. And no, I cannot give you keys to house before it is yours. From a friend. Try explaining to a single mother that just because she and her son have the same last name, that does not make them brother and sister. Probably too late to the party for anyone to see this, but explaining to my client's customer why my client cannot sign a general NDA because my client's job was to provide reports to other parties. Not the dumbest, but the one I have the most problem with is attorney-client privilege. It's only a secret and safe from discovery from the other side. If you keep a secret, don't forward my emails to other people. Don't talk about your case. Keep it a secret. My mother claimed that she was abused when she hired her lawyer after my father started divorce proceedings. After the first court date, he had to explain to her that in order to claim abuse you have to actually be abused. She just thought that if she said it everyone would take her word for it. Late to the party, a pimp was on trial in federal court for sex trafficking and was being cross-examined about allegedly beating a prostitute. Her responded, "I didn't beat her that hard. I just hit her like you would a puppy." His defense to beating a hooker was that he also beats puppies.